Still sane, Doctor? The Who Is Real event I find to be actually definitely one of my top events lore-wise for the story. But let's take a look at what the mechanics are for this event. So this event really tries to mix things up with having different color of deployable tiles. So you can see here that you can go into the light aura or the darkness aura, and this event and its enemies very heavily revolve around that, as Nyan explains. Now they call it Hui and Ming, but I'll just call it light and darkness for simplicity. Though I do find it funny that in the tutorial stage it says that you can have a unit limit of 99. So how it works is that for whatever tiles that you place your operators on, as it will be explained here, is that enemies of the same color, the enemies will have reduced attack against each other. So you have light on light versus black on black as well. They will have reduced attack, and then if you have opposites, so light versus darkness, and so on, you'll get increased attack. So with the light and darkness effects, this event not only has that as an option to deal extra damage or take reduced damage from enemies, but of course, naturally, some of the enemies have special attributes, such as the blindey, that can only be blocked by units of the same attribute, and even enemies that switch attributes of colored tiles. And then, let me see here. And then they have an enemy that makes it so that they're more likely to be attacked. And also enemies that attack the opposite color more often. So the Smarty is probably the most the most memorable enemy besides the blindies. I find the blindies to be quite irritating to deal with, but the Smarty I find to be probably the most interesting how they incorporated these into the gameplay. So it can only be blocked by units of the same attribute, but they explode on death, dealing arts damage. Now this arts damage isn't too high, except for the EX stages. It does drastically increase the attack that they have. And then they deal extra damage if they have the opposite attribute. What is interesting, though, is that these explode if it touches another enemy of an opposite attribute. So what I really like about this is that in the clip I'll show in the next few seconds is that they put in some of the stages that if you know what the routes are for these enemies, you don't need to do anything, and actually interfering with their patterns actually typically makes the stage more difficult. So with the EX stages, of course with the naturally harder enemies that are portrayed in the EX stages, you also get enemies that are more influenced with the different colors. So the improved version of the Fury Ink Spirit, it greatly increases attack when attacking the opposite attribute. And in the clip that I'll show, these things will have nearly 4,000 attack against your operators, so unless you have extremely high defense, these will hit very hard, and also have them leveled up high enough. And then you have even more tanky blindies, so have good sources of arts damage. So lastly, I do want to quickly mention the boss before I show the clip. So the free enemy has 2 health bars and will switch the colors of the attributes, and if you don't break its shield that appears in certain intervals, that they do huge amounts of damage, pretty much wiping out anyone in the area of effect, especially if they're the opposite attribute. Unless you have Nightingale or operators with naturally high resistance, they will pretty much get one-shotted by it. So summarizing all of this up, I did enjoy the concepts of the Who is Real event with the different colors. It definitely made it seem like, especially on the EX stages, quite difficult to have the right colors, especially with the blindies that can only be blocked by the same attribute. But I do want to mention that I find it really odd that on some of the stages, especially the farmable ones, as you can see here, there are so many tiles that you can use that are not colored. And I found that on some of the stages, like, they kind of made it way too easy just to ignore the mechanic altogether, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do find it to be an interesting contrast to the Mansfield Break event that I covered before, that in the Mansfield Break event, every enemy, pretty much, you had the worry of breaking free and gaining their extra attributes. But here, on some of them, you can somewhat avoid the attribute coloring altogether, especially with high enough DPS. You can even kill some of the enemies that can only be blocked by certain attributes. So overall, I think it was a good mix-up, but definitely some of them were definitely pretty annoying though. But overall, I really enjoyed the lore on this event, and I think Dusk was definitely a really great character to learn about, and Saga as well.